to you by the First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners of Central Ohio. It is locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. Hello, I'm Chase Brown, the host of 11 Warriors Live, joined today, as always, by Deputy Editor Dan Hope and reporter Andy Anders. If you'll notice, there's a little bit of a different title in the bottom right corner for me, different producer, going to senior producer. Have to shout that out on this episode as we get going. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But I would like to start the conversation with this, guys. Not talking about myself, but talking about the Ohio State football game on Saturday.
Boo, talk about Chase, boo.
Ohio State beats Ohio 37-9 on a Saturday night in the Horseshoe. We didn't get a night game for Texas, didn't get a night game for Grambling, but we get a night game for Ohio in the Horseshoe. The atmosphere was pretty good around the stadium. I would say yesterday, 105,000 people plus, nearing toward 106, I believe, were in the stadium for the game on Saturday. But it wasn't necessarily Ohio State's best performance in the game. Particularly as we'll get into later in the episode, some red zone troubles for Ohio State, but they did have some players that popped, namely Bo Jackson, Arvell Reese, Caden Curry, Jeremiah Smith, a few of them to name off the top of the show, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Dan, how you doing today? How's this Sunday treating you after a long night in the press box?
I'm a little tired. It's a long night after a night game, but plugging through it here to give some live analysis here on 11 Warriors Live. But yeah, I thought it was another great environment in Mizzou last night. Night games are always fun. I think in general, I think the environments at Mizzou this year have been great so far. For some of a reputation that maybe Ohio Stadium has had for not being loud, I don't think that's been the case at all this year. I think the fans have brought it every game. I think a lot of the game day atmosphere changes have worked. I thought, it was fun last night that Brutus and Rufus really kind of leaned into their feud. They had a couple of fun little segments during TV timeouts, during the halftime show. They kind of embraced each other and buried the hatchet. So I thought Ohio State had fun with that. I think the environments at Mizzou have been great. It's going to be weird. We're not going to have another game in Mizzou for 3 weeks. You got a bye week this week ahead, and then a trip to Washington the week after. So it's like we've been there 3 weeks in a row. Now we get a few week break. But I think, all in all, non-conference play at Mizzou this year, a success both in terms of the on-field results and the crowd atmosphere.
Andy, you have your Cincinnati Bengals garb on again this week. Unfortunately for me, that garb was a good luck charm as you and your Bengals were able to defeat my Cleveland Browns in the 1 o'clock window. It was very unfortunate to get off of this call and then watch that on a Sunday. But we're in high spirits again this week, coming off of another week of Ohio State victory, going into an NFL Sunday. As you wake up this morning on this Sunday, what's your prevailing thought from the Ohio State game that we might get into later on the broadcast?
Yeah, my prevailing thought is that Bo Jackson is running back one for this team. I think we'll dive into that discussion a little more. And I even said it last week on the live show that I thought that would be the case eventually, but it's becoming clear very early on. On the Bengals gear for 1 o'clock games, I think I'm going to be, I got to be ready to roll after the live stream and, support my team. So that's where if it's in a 4:30 window, I'll probably switch up the attire. If they're playing Monday night, whatever it is. But for 1 o'clock game, I got to come ready to rock, especially when the Bengals were 1-11 in the first 2 weeks of the season with Joe Burrow at quarterback. I'm not sure if you'd heard that statistic, Chase. They hadn't won a season opener in forever. So good luck. I have to repeat it. There was no other choice. Back to the Buckeyes. Yeah, Bo Jackson was my top standout from this. I think it's me and Dan talked about it on After Carmen. Like, if I'm Ryan Day, I'm elated that I come out of last night with coaching points because you beat Texas, then the number one team in the country, and had a game plan focused on relying on your defense. So even then, as you're critiquing things with the offense, it's like, well, the game plan was intentionally conservative. Grambling State, you stomped 70-0. Yes, coaches are going to find things to nitpick on film. The punt return was an issue, but that it's really like this game, you actually have sloppiness from penalties, from a couple of turnovers that Julian Sayin had, from the red zone struggles, obviously 2 for 6, just 2 touchdowns, 5 for 6 scoring, but only 2 touchdowns, 3 field goals, turnover on downs in there. So I think that ability to go into the bye week and attack those issues that might be plaguing the team, particularly running the ball inside the 20-yard line, ironing out some of the mistakes that were made across the board, I think is a big benefit for the team, honestly. And you still come out with a really comfortable win against a pretty pesky Ohio team that gave Rutgers fits on the road, that beat West Virginia. So, yeah, I think honestly a lot of positives moving into the off week, even if they come from negatives, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Let's start with the red zone struggles that Ohio State experienced against Ohio. Excuse me, as I have a frog in my throat. Ohio State outgained. Whoa, boys, I am really struggling. Ohio State outgained Ohio 572 total yards to Ohio's 181. Julian Sayin threw for 347 yards in this game. Ohio's quarterbacks, when it was Parker Navarro, who exited the game with an injury, but then there was also Nick Polis, who came in the game. They combined for 113 yards, and then Ohio State outgains Ohio on the ground 225-68. But for most of this game, the scoreboard was relatively close. I don't know if you guys would have said this, but from my opinion, it felt like Ohio State was never going to lose this game, but it felt like there was definitely some tension in the stadium about how Ohio State was driving down the field seemingly with ease. But once they got within 20 yards of the end zone, they couldn't string together enough plays to get in the end zone and put 6 points on the board. As Andy had mentioned, Ohio State made 6 trips to the red zone. They resulted in 3 field goals, 1 turnover, and 2 touchdowns. So that was the number one thing that Ryan Day addressed in his post-game press conference, was Ohio State being able to move the ball down the field, but not being able to finish these drives off. Dan, as you were watching this game from the press box, was there anything that stood out to you about Ohio State's inability to get into the end zone on Saturday?
I'm gonna jump in here as Chase needs some water.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's fighting through it over here, kind of like Ohio State was fighting through it inside the 20-yard line last night. But yeah, I mean, I got to still rewatch the game. Haven't had time yet because of the late ending last night to kind of maybe get a little better idea of what went wrong in some of those, red zone possessions. But, I think even just looking at the numbers, the thing that kind of sticks out is even with the times where they were successful in the red zone, it was a very long developing touchdown pass to Max Clare, which I think Julian Sayin did a great job keeping his eyes downfield, eventually finding Max Clare for the touchdown. But that play took a while to develop. Like that play wasn't necessarily executed exactly the way it was drawn up. Julian Sayin kind of had to buy some time there to make that play happen. And then the other touchdown in the red zone was an end around to Jeremiah Smith. And so there was not a drive in this game where Ohio State just kind of ran the ball down the field and finished, with kind of a traditional run it into the end zone kind of drive. So I think that's the thing that this game lacked for Ohio State. Now, the good news is they still scored 37 points. I mean, we saw how explosive this offense can be once again. Julian Sayin with a pair of beautiful deep balls, particularly the second one to Carnell Tate for a touchdown, also had one to Jeremiah Smith. And so I still come out of Saturday thinking there's a lot to like about this offense, but it is clear that the running game, particularly in the red zone, is something that Ohio State has to clean up. And I think some of it is going to be interesting to me to see as we go into conference play. How does Ohio State handle this running back rotation? And do they commit to Bo Jackson the way I think most onlookers feel like they should? Because it feels like, one, when he gets in the game, he's just a different runner than James Peoples and CJ Donaldson. And I do wonder somewhat if the amount of rotation that's not really letting anybody get into a rhythm there might be having some effect on some of those running plays in situational football. So it's going to be interesting to see, one, how does Ohio State change kind of a way its running back rotation unfolds over the course of the season? And two, if they kind of settle in more of, Bo leading the way, tighten the rotation, whatever, will that lead to more success?
Yeah, what was interesting in the press conference after the game, Dan, I don't know if you were able to be around for this as different players were moving in the back of the room, but Ryan Day, I believe it was near the start of his press conference, somebody asked him immediately about the run game, and he just started kind of rattling off stats. He was reading from the stat sheet in front of him on the podium, and he goes, Bo Jackson, 9 attempts for 109 yards. James Peoples, 7 attempts for 47 yards. CJ Donaldson, 9 for 39. Jeremiah, 1 for 17. And you could kind of see not necessarily this disappointed look, but there wasn't any numbers that really were like popping up that would have made him excited. And then immediately he took his attention off of that to the red zone. So that was that was the thing dominating his mind. But you could definitely tell that run game is something that's also starting to maybe become a point of interest for him moving forward after these first 3 games, if it hasn't already been already. I know he's talked about some of the inefficiencies in that game or in that part of the game. I do think that there is something to be said about what you brought up, Dan, about the rotation. You have 3 guys there hovering around 10 carries, which you would like to see as a running back. At least one of those guys start to come forward as somebody who's going to get 15 to 20 carries, maybe even pushing toward 25 in a traditional running back structure to get the legs going and to get some consistency on the hot hand. But we haven't seen that in a long time with Ohio State because last year they had Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, and those 2 guys are both such high-level backs that they don't need to be getting as many carries. But right now, as Ohio State's trying to figure this out, I know where Andy's going to go with this answer. But Andy, what needs to happen for one of these guys to emerge? Is it just that one of these guys needs to get more carries for this run game to really start moving? Or do they still need to kind of figure out who's going to be the lead back moving forward?
Yeah, I think I stand in a different place maybe than where you guys are at with it. First of all, with Ryan, I kind of had a different read with that answer than you did, Chase. And, different reporters were going to hear different things and take it different ways. But Ryan was asked specifically about the run game struggling, and he said, I don't think that's the story from the game. I think the red zone is. And pointed to the total rushing numbers, which was 31 carries for 225 yards. They ended up averaging more than 7 yards per carry in this game, which is a great number. And I think that was kind of his point, was that he felt like the run game in the red zone specifically was an issue, but that overall he felt they ran the ball pretty well. And honestly, they again, when they were outside the 20s, I thought they did kind of, but much better when Bo Jackson was carrying it. And I do think that he should get a lion's share of the carries, not just he ended up with the most carries in this game. They were kind of riding the hot hand there, I think. But I would like to see him become more of the feature back, maybe get 12 carries, whereas James Peoples and CJ Donaldson are around that 6-7 mark. I think with that, the only issue with Bo, and I am fully on the Bo Jackson RB1 train, but there is something to be said for he is not on the same level when it comes to pass protection as the other 2 backs, and particularly James Peoples, who has been a beast in pass protection. And you don't want to show your hand to a defense potentially, or at least show tendency by putting Bo Jackson on the field if you're not trusting him as much on passing downs. So that's why I think you'll continue to see quite a bit of rotation in that backfield, mainly because of that, right or wrong. When the ball's in his hands, he's the best running back at running the football, which is the most important thing, right? He has a different gear, a different explosion, a different speed than anyone else in the room. He runs through tackles well, and it's Ryan Day talks about his home run hitting ability. That's great. I think he's also great at taking 6 yards of space and turning it into an 11-yard gain because he's able to split one extra gap than James or CJ can with that burst that he has and fall forward for the extra 5 yards that maybe they're not getting. To me, I think it's not just on the explosive ability, it's also on those chunk plays. Short yardage, CJ Donaldson clearly has the niche there for this team. He struggled early in this game and in some of those runs in the red zone, maybe not moving the pile as much as they want him to move it. Got stood up on what was a really good play by Ohio's linebacker there on the goal line, but got better as the game went on. Got a key third down conversion or two in short yardage. And again, I think that's his niche, and he looked really good receiving out of the backfield in this game too. But to me, Bo Jackson is the best guy running the football. Should get a lion's share of the carries. I think they are going to keep rolling guys unless he can take steps in pass protection, just so that they aren't showing their hand all the time to the defense and saying Bo Jackson's on the field. We're more likely to run the ball than not. Because you don't necessarily trust him as much in pass protection, or you just, whenever he's on the field on a passing play, you have him run a route instead and get him in space because he did make one nice reception or play at. It was an easy reception. He made a nice play after the catch in this one too. So to me, Bo Jackson, though, TLDR has shown he's the RB1 for this team, should be the RB1 for this team, the first running back, getting the lion's share of the carries through 2 games.
I just want to add, going back to the Ryan Day press conference, that I appreciate that after he was asked his first question of a press conference about the running game, that he gave a well thought out 3-minute long answer about his team that just ran for 225 yards on 7.3 yards per carry, whereas a certain coach from Louisiana had an absolute meltdown when he was asked about his running game struggling after they had less than 4 yards per carry for the third game in a row.
That was wild, wasn't it? I could not imagine Ryan Day stepping up to a podium and just getting into a sparring match with one of the reporters on our beat. That just doesn't seem any at all in his character.
We haven't seen it. We're in what, year 7 now of Ryan Day as head coach, and we like, I've had people ask me that, like, has he ever like yelled at you? And I'm like, I don't really think I've ever heard him yell at any reporter in a setting. Maybe there's a question he like didn't like, but he's always been very cordial about it.
Yeah, very much so. Dan, I have a question for you regarding Ohio State's offense and just some of the balance that Ryan Day seems to strive for in that area. Just some numbers that have popped out to me over the past few weeks rather, where Ohio State's playing against Texas, number 1 team in the country, season opener. You would expect them to run the ball a little bit more with a new quarterback coming in. They ran the ball 34 times in that game. Julian Sayin threw it 20. The following week against Grambling State, Ohio State runs the ball 38 times. Julian Sayin, Lincoln Keenels, and Tavian St. Clair combined for 28 pass attempts. But then just against Ohio, this was the first game where Ohio State threw the ball more than it ran the ball. Granted, it was just by one play. Julian Sayin throws the ball 32 times. Ohio State runs the ball 31. Ryan Day talks a lot about balance and trying to find balance within running and throwing the ball. What do you find would be Ohio State's best strategy as it now emerges from non-conference play, entering into Big Ten play? What do you think the balance is for throwing the ball and running the ball in this offense, given the talent that Ohio State has in all those different position rooms?
I mean, it's whatever's working best, right? And I mean, I do think that, when the passing game is firing on all cylinders, it is Ohio State's best offense right now. I mean, again, we're talking up Bo Jackson, and I think he's shown a lot of really good things, has shown a lot of potential as a freshman, but they don't have a Travion Henderson or a Quinshon Judkins right now. It's also a reality that, as much as I've been impressed by Julian, the one area of his game that I view as a weakness right now is his running ability. I think you saw that on the 4th and goal play yesterday, where he kind of needed to make a play with his legs when things broke down and he wasn't able to make that play. So right now, I haven't really seen anything through 3 games to make me think that Julian running the ball is going to be much of a factor in this offense. Maybe Lincoln Keenholz running the ball on occasion will be a factor in this offense, as we saw on one play, an 8-yard gain on a 3rd and 2 conversion last night. But, the running game, I think, right now, clearly the running game is not as strong as it was a year ago for this Ohio State offense. So they may need to lean a little bit more heavily on that passing attack. I mean, Julian Sayin is far more CJ Stroud than he is Will Howard. And, we saw with CJ Stroud when he was running the offense, it was a pass heavy attack. They leaned on that pass game heavily. And so I think, right now, that is what you'd expect is, in a close game, you'd expect Ohio State to pass the ball more than they run it. In a more lopsided game, you might be running out the clock later in the game. But you would think that with this offense, with the weapons they have, I mean, you have the best receiver in the country. Another guy who I keep saying it, the way he's playing right now, is going to be a first-round pick in Carnell Tate. They started to get Max Clare going last night. There's so many weapons on this offense, and a quarterback who's playing at a fantastic level for a guy who's made just 3 starts. I think the passing game is certainly the strength of this offense and is probably what's, at least right now, going to have to be the biggest thing to carry them forward if they're going to make another championship run.
On the Lincoln Keenholz, when he came into the game for that one play, Ryan Day was asked about it after the game. He said that we do have more things for him. The whole offense is available and Lincoln is in there. We'll keep looking at that and probably have some of that available. It's not going to be a surprise anymore because they've shown their hand. It's not a secret, he says, have some of that available in the red zone if we're having a hard time. So that could also be a potential solution to those red zone issues once they get closer to the goal line. I want to talk a little bit about Lincoln Keenholz. I'll ask you this, Andy. Ryan Day said in his press conference after the game that he thought Sayin played well. He said he had a lot of good plays. He said but there are things that you have to learn as a quarterback. It's hard to us keep this in mind sometimes with Julian Sayin, given how well he's played in these first 3 games, that he's just a first-time starter. He's a redshirt freshman. It surprised me after the Grambling State game that he won Big Ten Freshman of the Week because I view him as a sophomore. I don't even really think of him as a redshirt freshman. He's in his 2nd year, but there are things that he has to learn as a quarterback in his first year as a starter at Ohio State. But still, Ryan Day said there's lots of great things to take away from his performance. He finished 25 of 32 for 347 yards. He had 3 touchdowns and those 2 interceptions. His first one was a batted interception, got hit near the line of scrimmage. His second one was one where he just wasn't as careful with the football as he should have been, and ended up trying to make a play when it wasn't there. Throws his second interception. So overall, it felt like Julian Sayin kind of had, a great performance, but just 2 things that really kind of stand out as something he needs to work on going into the bye week. But Andy, how would you assess his performance in this game, leading the offense in the red zone, but also his performance in delivering those throws to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate? Overall, what did you see?
Yeah, I still think it was a great outing from Julian, and those 2 mistakes, were mistakes after the game. I think I put a little less blame on Julian for the first interception than Ryan Day gave him, which Ryan Day knows way more about quarterback play than me, so I'm going to defer to his opinion on that. He said that Julian should have seen the quarterback spy in the middle of the line of scrimmage there and not thrown it into that window, which watching the replay makes a lot of sense. Second one was clearly on him, right? You just got to eat a sack. And Ryan and Julian both talked about post-game, like you have to use your third hand, which for a quarterback is your chest. You pin the football against your chest when you're getting sacked. And then he kind of just like threw it out for the interception there. It might have even been a fumble. I'm not sure how they would have ruled it if he hadn't.
It probably should have been a fumble. I was watching that this morning. I saw some people saying that the ball, he didn't really make a forward throwing motion. So it doesn't really matter. It's the same result either way, but it probably should have been a fumble, not an interception.
Right. So either way, 2 turnovers that he was responsible for in some way. Even if he's getting hit on the blind side of that play, you just have to have that sense. And that comes with experience. Like both of those plays, I think, are mistakes where you look at it and go, this is something easily teachable, easily fixable. You wear a black jersey in practice as a quarterback. You're not getting hit on a rush like that a lot of the time. And we really haven't seen Julian get hit. Ohio State didn't allow a sack the first 2 weeks. I actually don't remember if they allowed a sack last night, but he hasn't been pressured a lot. He hasn't been hit a lot. And so you have to go through those experiences and have those. And it's good to get them out against Ohio before you play tougher competition later down the line. And maybe that's also why they didn't want to expose him as much against Texas, and why they've been opening up the passing game a lot more the last 2 weeks. The two deep balls in this game, getting to the good stuff with Julian, were incredible, especially the one to Carnell. Like you couldn't hand that ball off to Carnell better. It was so perfect, right on a line, traveled all that way in the air on a post route. I was really impressed with the throw to Jeremiah too. Traveled 55 yards in the air, and he put a lot of air under it to just allow Jeremiah to go adjust to the ball, make the play, and was still very accurate with it. He just so rarely seems to make throws that are off target. Like everything is a tight spiral. He knows when to zip it. He knows when to put air under it. There were a lot of 15 yards and underneath throws, a lot of 10 yards and underneath throws in this game from Julian, where he just missiled it with perfect timing on maybe a hitch route, maybe a curl that wasn't particularly open. Like he had time, but it was a timing throw and a zip throw that he had to make, right? And those kinds of throws are underrated. Throws where you're throwing to the opposite sideline from a hash, where it's a comeback route. He had a couple of those to Jeremiah that are, again, super impressive when a quarterback is able to make those kinds of throws all the way across the field with such accuracy. That's the thing you keep talking about with Julian when it comes to him as a passer. It's just how precise all of those throws are, and it's why he has such an incredible completion percentage through 3 games. I mean, this was another one, 25 of 32 passing. So, had the most yards since 2022 when CJ Stroud had 348 in the Peach Bowl. He gets 347 in this game. The numbers are bearing it out. Julian looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the country right now, full stop. And I think as he's getting out those second year mistakes that just come with experience, that's going to prove out. He could even enter the Heisman conversation, although it seems Jeremiah Smith is going to be this team's leading Heisman candidate, to no one's surprise.
To answer your question, there was one sack last night. It was the 4th down play. That was a sack because Julian never left the pocket. Also, to your point, Julian currently ranks 2nd in the country in completion percentage at 78.9, behind only Carson Beck. His quarterback rating is also 3rd in the country, behind only USC's Jaden Mayava and Texas Tech's Baron Morton. So certainly a fantastic start to the year for Julian Sayin.
Yeah, and some of those quarterbacks that we thought were going to be Heisman contenders have certainly not lived up to their billing so far this season, whether it be Clemson's Cade Klubnik or Texas's, man, they're having some struggles with Arch Manning.
Man.
I definitely thought coming into this year that he was going to be somebody that would, blow everyone away, but it has not happened so far this season, and the vibes are definitely off in Austin. But where the vibes are not off, I will say, is with Ohio State's defense, which continues to impress week after week. Aside from really the first drive in the second half from Ohio, which was where Ohio was able to deliver a pass where Lorenzo Styles didn't make a play on the ball and then was unable to get him to the ground. That would have been wide receiver Chase Hendricks from Ohio, who he wasn't able to get to the ground. It was quite a long touchdown run after he received the ball and then ran probably almost 40 yards to the end zone without being taken down. But outside of that, really, possession, Ohio State's defense was as good as it has been all season long. There were a few standouts on that side of the ball. We've been talking a lot about offense, but let's go here. Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, those 3 guys you're just going to probably say were some of Ohio State's top performers week in, week out. But Dan, I know that you saw some great things from Caden Curry on Saturday and some of his performance. So can you just talk to the way that Caden Curry was able to make an impact in this game?
Yeah, I thought Caden Curry was fantastic. I think he's been great all year, but I think, this was really the best game I've seen Caden Curry play in his career in terms of just making a consistent impact on the game. I mean, Pro Football Focus had him with 7 total quarterback pressures last night. He broke up a pass. He had, 2 big plays on 3rd down, a 3rd down sack, 3rd down pass breakup. You just felt that constant presence with him. And I think that was true of the entire pass rush last night. I think this is the most we felt the pass rush really consistently all year. I think Kenyatta Jackson's a guy I'd kind of been waiting to see him flash. I felt like he did that in the second half. Almost had a touchdown there. It was an incomplete pass pretty clearly, but did scoop up the ball. Almost had a scoop and score, which would have been fun. Bo Atkinson's a guy I definitely noticed last night too. He was getting to the quarterback, and then Arvell Reese. I mean, he's just a beast. And I mean, I was so impressed with Arvell last night because we know that he's this physical freak who can make plays all over the field. But what really impressed me about Arvell last night was his discipline. He was the guy who they were using on most plays to spy the quarterback. And he was consistently where he needed to be. He for a guy who's still relatively inexperienced as a starter, he looked like a veteran out there in terms of diagnosing the play, getting himself into position, and making the play. And so, I mean, Arvell Reese, I said it with Carnell Tate. I mean, Arvell Reese is another guy. He's playing himself into being a first-round NFL draft pick right now. I mean, you see it every game now, the draft Twitter folks out there hyping up Arvell Reese because he has been an absolute beast so far this year. And, you pair him with Sonny Styles at linebacker, certainly a fantastic duo there. So I think, like you said, Chase, I think a lot to like about the defense last night, particularly I think in that front. I think the defensive front had a really good game. A little disappointing, honestly, that we didn't get to see a full game of Parker Navarro, because I think you could make the case Parker Navarro might be the best quarterback Ohio State has faced so far this year, the way Arch Manning has struggled, at least right now. In terms, Arch Manning might get there as he gets more experience, but at least right now, you could make the case Parker Navarro is the best quarterback Ohio State's faced so far this season. So I would have liked to see how that played out over a full game, but certainly outside of that, I mean, if you take that 67-yard play out of the equation, if I do the math here real quick on the spot, that's 114 yards over 54 plays. I mean, that's under 3 yards a play. So by and large, a dominant performance by the Ohio State defense once again.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I turned to Dan in the press box at one point after Arvell Reese had made one of his several plays in the game on Saturday. And Field Yates from ESPN, he had tweeted that he thinks Arvell Reese is starting to become this year's Jalen Walker, Georgia linebacker that got drafted 15th overall to, I believe, the Atlanta Falcons in 2025. And he's someone that has that same athleticism that Arvell Reese does. You can just see it out there in everything that he does. That athleticism is what drives him forward. And Dan, I also want to continue off your point about Parker Navarro. I think if you gave Ryan Day some truth serum, he's honestly a little bit upset that Parker Navarro got hurt in the game on Saturday, because the look that he was able to give them, even with hampered by a wrist injury, is what it seemed like after Bo Atkinson had hit him pretty early in the game. The way he was moving was pretty exciting. And I would have liked to see an entire game of Ohio State trying to defend him. Not to say that Nick Polis didn't also continue giving Ohio State the reps that they needed, but that you could see that there was a noticeable drop off there with those two players. And I think that there is an opportunity that Ohio State could have had, especially as they prepare for this Big Ten schedule, to have gained some valuable reps playing an entire game against Parker Navarro. Andy, I want to ask you, what's another standout on the defense that you saw from Saturday's game? We've talked about Arvell, we've talked about Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson some, but was there anybody else that stood out to you from Ohio State's defensive performance on Saturday?
Yeah, a couple guys. Cade McDonald is someone I don't want to continue to, I want to continue to shine light on how good he's been at nose guard for this team. Had some nice pressure to get a sack. My favorite play of Saturday was Jalen McLean's hit over the middle to force an incompletion.
You got barbecue back there?
You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. He's been so solid. I think Lathan Ransom is such an easy comparison because he just was here for Ohio State, but he's doing a lot of things that remind you of Lathan Ransom. And Lathan was also so quietly good in pass coverage. Now, Jalen McLean the long touchdown to Chase Hendricks was a play where he should have at least been able to tackle Chase. He probably gets some of the blame for that going for a touchdown. But, as much as Lorenzo Styles was right there and that was his man, but Jalen McLean has been quietly really good at pass coverage otherwise. Whenever he's targeted, he has been really good back there at safety. They've trusted him a lot to be just lone man center fielder and done some different things in front of him with coverage alignments. Lorenzo's done some of that too. But he has been all over the place and great in run support too throughout the year. I want to highlight him and how well he's done alongside Caden McDonald. I think those are two other guys that I'd point to in this game outside of Arvell Reese and Caden Curry and Bo Atkinson, who had obviously great performances too.
There is, it's funny that I'm about to say this, and I don't know how people who are watching this live stream will react, but there was a pretty great take that I heard from Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports, of all people, on one of his podcasts, who was saying, and Matt Patricia, his role at Ohio State being a college defensive coordinator is so significantly different than being an NFL defensive coordinator. And the primary reason he brought that up was quarterback play. If you think Matt Patricia and all the years that he spent as an NFL defensive coordinator, I'll just use today's quarterbacks as an example. You're game planning against Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. I go on and on. Like,
not to mention like 15 years of practicing against Tom Brady.
Exactly. Right. Perfect. Yes, that is a great addition, because you go from that to now game planning against essentially a college quarterback entirely running an offense. And the drop off there in not only talent, but discipline in practice and experience. You give a guy who is a literal rocket scientist, who has a degree that he could have gone on to just go and be in aeronautical engineering and all these different things. He is going to create game plans that are going to confuse even the best of quarterbacks. And we already saw it against Texas with Arch Manning. I know we kind of jabbed at him a little bit for some of the struggles that he's had through 3 games, but he does have raw talent that some other quarterbacks in college don't have. And the way Matt Patricia has been able to utilize the talent on Ohio State's defense has really been impressive to me through 3 games. I want to talk about that holistically as we kind of move into our last section, talking before we open up to questions from the 11 Warriors audience. If you had to give a grade and maybe a brief explanation for that grade of Ohio State's performances through 3 games, what would that grade be, and how would you determine that grade, Dan?
I mean, I got to give him an A. I mean, you beat the number 1 team in the country in your first game of a season. You then win 70-0 in your second game of a year. Yeah, there was some unevenness, just like my pronunciation of that word last night. But in the end, just like me getting through that word, they ultimately got it done. They ultimately won by 28 points. And so there's certainly some things that we can nitpick if you were getting into specific areas here, like red zone offense or running games, or our friend Ramsey Nasrallah's favorite unit, the special teams. I wouldn't give those specific things an A, but for the team as a whole, I got to give Ohio State an A, because they have, a win over a team that was ranked number 1 in the country, and then 2 convincing wins to finish off non-conference play.
Andy, what's your grade for the Buckeyes through 3 games?
Yeah, I'm with Dan. I'm giving them an A. Like he said, few things to nitpick, but an A is a 90% or above, at least by the college grading scale. At my high school, it was 93% for whatever reason, and they didn't adjust our GPAs accordingly. Still the gripe I have.
This sounds like a man who got a 91 or a 92 and is still salty about it.
Emailed the teacher they didn't round up his grade.
Yes, but yeah, 90% or above, and that's, I think, an easy mark where this team is. Like you said, beat the number 1 team in the country. The offense is explosive. Just got to iron out some things in the red zone. The defense has looked, they look like the best defense in the country again. I think the scheme has been so beautiful and weaponized all the different guys they have in so many unique ways, that this has been a great marriage between Matt Patricia and this defense. And I'm giving them an A. I'm with Dan.
Yeah, I won't try and save a graphic here. I think across the board, an A is a great grade for Ohio State through 3 weeks. We'll see how this season turns out for those 3 opponents. But you ultimately are going to have a top 10 win, I think, on your schedule with this Texas team. I think they'll overcome some of their early season struggles that they might be having on the offensive end of the football, but that defense is still going to be one of the best in America when the year is all said and done. And I think that Ohio State, looking back on that victory, is going to be able to use it as a piece to advocate for themselves once the college football playoff comes around. Especially as they push for either securing themselves a bye, and it doesn't really matter with a Big Ten championship, or if they don't ultimately secure that championship, advocating for still that first round bye in the playoffs. I want to move to a question that we have from our YouTube chat. This is one about the offensive line. There was some shuffling around on the offensive line on Saturday. This question is particularly about the right guard spot. A question: who can replace Tegra Shibola? They point out that Ethan Onyanwa is a candidate, but they say that Ethan Onyanwa looks out of place at right guard. I want to go to you, Dan. What are your thoughts on that right guard position through those 3 games, and what maybe solutions does Ohio State have to fix some of the issues that may have come up at that spot?
Well, I do think that if a change is made there, it is most likely to be Ethan Onyanwa stepping in. Now, I was a little surprised looking at the snap counts that Ethan Onyanwa ended up only playing 14 snaps last night. They did, sub him in there after Tegra Shibola committed 2 penalties, but they ended up going back to Tegra Shibola. Obviously, as mentioned earlier, Tegra, missed a block on that second interception by Julian. So I do think that we talk about things to work on during a bye week. I do think that's one position that Tyler Bowen, Ryan Day should be carefully evaluating during the bye week, is that right guard spot, because I do think it's been the weakest spot on this offensive line so far. And I think, frankly, that's why Ethan Onyanwa was at right guard now, because I think they have known since the start of the year that might be their weakest spot in that front 5. I mean, I think Phillip Daniels, has maybe been their best offensive lineman. I think he's been really good at that right tackle spot. I think that left side is really solidified with Austin Sierraveld, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman. But that right guard spot, definitely room for improvement there. I think, Tegra Shibola, the fact that he's been rotated out in every game tells you they're not fully sold on Tegra Shibola. And I think certainly after last night, the questions about him have only increased. So, if I'm sitting here right now and was to predict who the starting right guard will be against Washington, I'd probably predict it's still going to be Tegra Shibola. But I'll be interested, when we talk to Ryan Day, Brian Hartline on Tuesday, to hear what they have to say about that, mixing more guys in. I don't really see another obvious candidate outside of those 2. I mean, maybe a Josh Padilla, maybe a Gabe Van Sickle, but we haven't seen those guys get any first team reps yet. So, that tells me that they do believe there's a gap between Ethan Onyanwa as that 6th man and everybody else.
There's a question in our forum from a 11 Warriors reader who asks, what's wrong with Brandon Inniss? A little bit forward of a question, but I think the heart of it is this: that Brandon Inniss through 3 games has 2 catches for 8 yards against Texas and 3 catches for 29 yards against Grambling State. So 5 for 37. I do not believe, I don't have the official stats in front of me, I do not believe he was targeted against Ohio. There was an opportunity he had where he seemingly was the person the play was designed for toward the end zone. He was open, but Julian Sayin just didn't see him. So there was an opportunity maybe for him to make an impact, but still he's left off the board without any statistical production against Ohio. Andy, what have you seen from Brandon Inniss through the first 3 games, and what maybe needs to change for him to make more of an impact as the season continues?
It's a good question. And, I think from him, I was expecting more explosion in the opportunities he's gotten. I'll be frank. Expecting more burst. I need to go back and watch the film, really, to borrow a quote from Ryan Day, borrow some coach speak, if you will. Rewatching the game will hopefully get a better sense, maybe get to zero in on Brandon and see exactly why he isn't getting the ball as much. He's not on the field as much as third receivers have been in the past for Ohio State. I'll point that out. Is that a him thing? Is it just that this is the best tight end room that Ryan Day's ever had thing? I would lean more toward the latter They are working in a lot of 12 and 13 personnel, and Brandon's the guy coming off the field when they do that. So he's also getting less snaps in general. That being said, I definitely expected him to have more of an impact, even if with reduced snaps considered that he's had through these 3 games. And he was open on some plays. Just watching from the press box, there was that touchdown, which I looked like a play specifically designed for him, where Julian didn't even look that direction. So I don't know, like maybe he just saw something in the defense's coverage, thought that was going to be blanketed, and it wanted to go elsewhere. But there were other plays where Brandon looked pretty open and just wasn't the guy who got the football or was targeted, whatever the case may be. So for me, I think I'd have to go back and then watch it a little better. He did have a much better game in the return game, and people like
He did.
I know people aren't gonna appreciate what happened on that one kickoff. That was not his fault. It's just a weird football play, man. The ball lands near the sideline on the 8. He can barely get to it because it's a very odd angle to run to. But the right thing to do there is to try and let it go out of bounds. And the ball lands within a yard of the sideline and bounces backward into the opposite way of the sideline. He honestly made a great play just to attack the ball, get on it, and cover it up, and not have a turnover in that situation, not give Ohio a chance to recover it. And in punt return, like he clearly took the feedback about not fielding enough punts from Ryan Day last week and applied it. There were multiple punts in this game that were not easy to field. He was having to catch them while in a sprint, or maybe while there was traffic around him, maybe some awkward spin on the ball. Fielded them cleanly and had a really nice punt return as well. Finally broke one, which I know a lot of people were waiting to see. Gave Ohio State good field position, and it led to a touchdown the next drive. So he had a good game as a return man. I think I need to watch the film to see if this is, a Julian Fleming situation where he's just not getting separation and it's not working out the way he was expected to, or if it's, just a situation where he's not on the same page as Julian and Julian's not finding him in the spots when he's open, um, or if, he's just kind of laying dormant, waiting for that big game. And Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate are getting a lot of touches too, so that's also part of it. But I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. And before I make any judgments about his game as a receiver, I think I'd probably go back and watch it. I will say he had a few nice blocks in this game too. That's something I did not want to highlight before I forgot. But yeah, lot to go into that conversation.
And that's something that Ohio State takes a lot of focus in, or takes a lot of pride in from their wide receivers, is their ability to block. We saw on a Saturday against Ohio that David Adolph was getting some reps out there, and you would think that guys like Quincy Porter or DC Jones, or some of these like 5-star, 4-star guys would be getting in the game over Mylan Graham over David Adolph, but if you can block, you're going to play. And Brandon Innes is one of Ohio State's best blockers on the perimeter. So that's why he's getting those reps out there. Dan, I got a question from you for our forum. It is one about Julian Sayin's deep ball accuracy. This is going to be unofficial so far. This forum commenter marked that Sayin was 3 for 3 on the deep balls on Saturday. I believe that's correct. So for the season, he is 7 for 7 for 352 yards and 5 touchdowns on balls thrown 20 yards or more in the air. Do you expect that Ohio State's going to become more consistent in throwing the deep ball, or do you think that this is kind of the pace, maybe 2 or 3 deep balls a game is what we're going to see from Julian Sayin moving forward?
Yeah, interesting. I was taking a look to see what Pro Football Focus had on that stat. They have it 9 for 9 for 394 and 6 touchdowns of a 96.6 grade on the deep ball. So, yeah, I think he's certainly been excellent in that regard. Like Andy said before, it's that, it's just that pinpoint accuracy that he has. You can see it, that he just the ball. I do think there's been some underthrows on those deep balls. Like, I still think he has some, even though, like, to his credit, like, they've all been completed. There have been some where the receivers have had to slow down. Like, I think the first one to Jeremiah last night, if he puts it out in front of Jeremiah a little more, that might be a touchdown. Jeremiah has to slow up for a little bit. they end up with a turnover on downs in the red zone. So I wouldn't say he's been perfect. That's just nitpicking, though. I mean, I think overall he's been very good in that deep part of a game, and certainly, I mean, you saw it last night. Like when the game was tight in the second half, and they need to make something happen, it was those deep balls to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate that finally allowed Ohio State to pull away in the game. So I do think, as the season progresses, like they get more and more comfortable with Julian, you're going to lean on that more because it is probably the toughest thing to stop in this offense. When you've got Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and you've got a quarterback who's as accurate as Julian Sayin is, that's really tough for any secondary to stop.
I think if you go back and watch the film too, Brian Hartline, for as much as Ohio State fans may have their grievances with his play calling in a game like last night against Ohio, the way that he's scheming up some of these routes are allowing Julian Sayin to make some throws in rhythm pretty comfortably. Like if you watch the route concepts, I was kind of blown away against Ohio with the way that Julian Sayin is able to go through his progressions and see that, Jeremiah Smith is taking away the high safety because he's running a route of 15 to 20 yards. Carnell Tate curls right underneath it at the 10-yard line past the line of scrimmage, and Julian Sayin's able to deliver a throw in stride perfectly on the numbers and keep these chains moving. So some of these concepts too are allowing for Ohio State maybe not to be throwing a deep ball, but it's opening up opportunities for wide receivers coming over the middle underneath or being able to make catches in that 5 to 15 yard range, and allowing them to get the ball in space and go to work. So I think that even if Ohio State's not throwing the deep ball more consistently moving forward, it is opening up opportunities for them to take advantage of different areas of the field. You need to be able to take the top off the defense. And especially Ohio State has the wide receivers to do that. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but there's another question from our YouTube chat. Does there need to be more quarterback runs built into the plan each game with Julian Sayin? And do you think that it could be something Ohio State incorporates coming out of the bye week? Andy, what do you think about that?
Like Dan said earlier, I think Julian's clearly not going to be involved in the run game very much. I personally always would want to see a few pulls, one or two pulls on his own read a game, just because if you're going to have a true mesh point on offense, you lose the threat that's there. You at least need to make the defense consider the fact that the quarterback's going to run. If you're going to run that sort of zone read mesh point type of play, Ohio State's been running more gap stuff from what I can tell and getting downhill with its running game or maybe just true inside zone handoffs. It seems the last few weeks, a lot of counters. Like I said, a lot of inside zone, some stretch plays, like stuff where the quarterback run isn't even supposed to be threatened, and you're more so just getting that running back downhill and allowing them to try and make some plays. So I think there's been a pivot in scheme away from some of that would from Julian, and if he had maybe a window or two to scramble in this game, and he instead kept his eyes downfield, made some nice plays doing that. The one to Max Clare, I think, the touchdown was an example of that, where he, maybe could have scrambled on that play, but decided to just take the shot instead and found Max Clare open. So I think he is not the type of quarterback that are going to get involved in the running game very much, for better or worse. I think I would like to see Lincoln Kienholz in that package deployed more, to get some quarterback run component, maybe just when you're in the red zone specifically. I think it's something that could open it up. Will Howard was so good for that last year. You get down close to the goal line, and having that quarterback run is so good in getting those red zone touchdowns. That's what Justin Fields did when he was here too, right? And they didn't necessarily run those guys JT Barrett numbers of times per game, but just having that red zone threat to pull and keep. Quarterbacks are such an effective weapon in the red zone for scoring touchdowns because you have to focus all the defense, and when things get condensed, it helps to have that extra body. You create an extra blocker by having your quarterback run the ball. So that's where I'd like to see it get involved more, is incorporating some more Lincoln Kienholz, but I don't think Julian Sayin is ever going to really be a rushing threat in this offense. As much as I'd like to see him start pulling and keeping once or twice a game, I just don't see it happening.
It's possible that they will unleash something like that in more matchup games. They didn't against Texas, but as the season continues and they need to get 2 or 3 yards on third down.
Yeah, like maybe the CFP. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that could also be another area Ohio State looks into, not just with Lincoln Kenols, but with Julian Sayin too. That one of the benefits of Ohio State down the stretch last season was having two running backs, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, that could run people over as blockers. And when you have Will Howard being able to quarterback power either left or right, you have those +1 matchups. That was something that Ryan Day talked a lot about this week with Parker Navarro, is that Ohio did that so well by adding another head to block another defender and to have +1 matchups. So could Ohio State look to that in situational spots against Washington in 2 weeks after Ohio State's bye? You obviously have Penn State coming up. You have some opponents that you're going to need to convert in third and short opportunities. And I did find it interesting that for years it seemed like Ohio State struggled, especially in those areas when they had CJ Stroud and Kyle McCord as their quarterback. But then Will Howard gets here and you're able to run quarterback power, and all of a sudden those issues are gone. And it could be something that allows Ohio State to have more success in those short yardage situations and then closer to the goal line as well. Guys, 12:57. I got to set my fantasy football lineup. Dan's got some football to watch. Andy has some Bengals to watch. But no, we had a lot of fun talking with everyone today on the latest episode of 11 Warriors Live. Thank you, as always, for your questions that you submit through the 11 Warriors Forum on Facebook and on YouTube. We will continue these conversations and this analysis throughout this week at 11warriors.com. There'll be plenty of engaging and entertaining stories, I'm sure, with a bye week coming up. But we just want to thank our sponsor. Again, it is First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. For Chase Brown, I am Chase Brown, and then we have Dan Hope, we have Andy Anders. It's been another episode of 11 Warriors Live, and we'll talk to you soon.